la muerte y no me la quiere dar. Todo el mundo le pide a Dios y la libertad.
They said, there's something about the way that people receive flamenco here that is very different. And I've always felt that we don't see it as simply a form of entertainment, but we see it as something that is very much a part of who we are and part of our own natural expression.
When I think about the Encinas legacy and Eva's incredible vision in this community, doing things that no one had ever done before, whether it is increasing the quality of the curriculum at the University of New Mexico, or whether it's actually thinking about a conservatory, whether it's thinking about camps and education and how one can introduce the core curriculum standards in New Mexico for education to flamenco. I mean, this is trailblazing work. And now we have 3 generations of that family continuing to enrich our community and tell our story with the presentation of flamenco. There are few individuals that I've ever approached about supporting the National Institute of Flamenco who said, no way, go pound sand. Instead, they say, oh, I've heard about that. Tell me more.
I think we will see many of our students rise to leadership positions through their role in the advancement of flamenco. It's all about giving back, learning, and lifting up one another to increase the knowledge of flamenco and bring in the next generations that follow us to advance flamenco in the state of New Mexico, regionally, nationally, and internationally.
Our flamenco here was every bit as good as you could get in Spain, and still is.
An ambassador would always say, Eva's an icon. She's built a whole industry here in New Mexico. And I always appreciated that he understood how grand, how much work, how much tenacity it takes to do something like build a flamenco community in New Mexico.
My name is Eva Encinas, a lifetime flamenco artist. I started studying as a very young child with my mother. I'm also a retired professor from the University of New Mexico, where I spent 40 plus years developing a flamenco concentration program. Years and years of introducing this art form to young adults that I hope had an impact on them knowing more about the art form and wanting to find out more.
So Clarita was the one that really started flamenco, and once again she had her studio on Edith Street. At that time there was no liaison with Spain, so really the flamenco dancing started locally. Of course, Clarita, Eva's mother.
Well, my mother was a fantastic, large human being. She came from a family, I believe there were 9 children in her family. It's a little mysterious as to how flamenco actually came into the family. My grandmother was a rezadora, so she was a beautiful singer. A rezadora being someone who would sing for lutos, for grieving in funerals. Clarita Garcia de Aranda, Allison. That was her married name. They were from the Garcia family that in Los Candelarias. So my mother had a beautiful voice, but she was also a wonderful dancer. She trained, I believe, with her older brother, Antonio, who had the opportunity to travel and study different forms of art. I should say most specifically different forms of dance. He was a self-trained musician, and he brought, in some of his travels, he brought back with him flamenco. And of course, in those days, if one sibling knew something wonderful, they would teach it to all their other siblings. And everybody, all my aunts and uncles, danced. My mother was one of the few that continued to become a professional dancer, and her brother Antonio. And they had an act that would travel around the country and did lots of performing here in Albuquerque. And so my mother, at a very early age, started a flamenco dance studio on the corner of Edith and Candelaria. I think maybe she was probably maybe late 20s, early 30s when she opened that studio. And so they bought this beautiful territorial style house on the corner of Edith and Candelaria in much disrepair. But he remodeled it, and it became this beautiful estate where he had a lab. He was an engineer, and my mother had her dance studio, and then we had our living space. And so we were raised, my brother and sister and I and my cousins, and lots of community people were raised in that dance studio. It's very interesting because we still have one of the people, Yolanda Metzger was her name at the time, who started in my mother's studio and still takes classes at our school here at Sawmill. So, you know, it was a wonderful resource for our community. We did lots of different types of dances. We did Spanish dances, which ranges from folklore dances to more Spanish classical styles. But flamenco was really kind of the one that spoke to my mother, I think the high drama. And she went on to teach us. And we'd do performances in Old Town and go to the Santa Fe Fiestas, and we'd go to Bernalillo and Raton and all over the state doing our little performances. So that had a huge impact on me. My mother's school, I remember my brother and sister were already taking classes, and I was very envious because I was about 3, they would say, and I would just stand in the doorway and try to be mimicking everything that was going on. My mother wouldn't usually take children until they were 5, but she let me come into the studio, and so I think I was about 3 or 4 years old when I first started to dance. And I had this love for, you know, it was interesting. It was dance for sure, but it was also teaching. My mom and dad would tell me that when I was very young, I would go out into our patio and my mother would always teach with this big baston, a stick that she could keep the rhythm of whatever it is that we were working on, and it would help the students to stay together. And so I would have my little stick out there, and I would be teaching the trees and the bushes how to dance. And no, lift your elbow there. No, drop your shoulder. And I would go through this whole class. And I had classes on a regular basis. And from that, I developed all of these imaginary friends that were my students, and that took on a whole I went into a whole nother chapter of my life. But, you know, it was interesting because my dad always told me later in life, he said, I knew you were going to be a teacher. He said, there was no question you were going to be a dancer. That was not a question. But I knew that you loved the process of teaching. And sure enough, I spent my entire life being a teacher. As I got older, this was while I was still in high school, they encouraged me to take some workshops. We would go to California and I'd do a workshop with someone there. And then we would go to, there was a wonderful artist in Texas, actually, in El Paso, that iconic artist that was already quite aged, but was someone that they knew that I needed to have contact with, so they would allow me to go and study with Antonio Triana in El Paso. And we spent, my dad at a point in his life was living in Mexico, so when I would go to Mexico, there would be a lot of fabulous artists there, and he would always make arrangements for me to be able to study there. So I was starting to get some influences from outside. When I graduated, I realized I wanted to continue to dance, but and I wanted to go to college. But the university dance program, as wonderful as it was, no flamenco. Understandably, because at that time, the flamenco pocket was very, very small in Albuquerque. But I knew that there would be some wonderful things that I could learn there. So I enrolled as an undergraduate student in the dance program. And a couple of years into it, my teachers were saying, you've done a lot of dance in your life. So I started to share this flamenco experience with them, and they became very excited and intrigued by the whole idea of this family tradition that obviously I had spent my life developing, but it was something completely outside of their realm because most of them were all ballet and modern dancers, which is the traditional forms of dance that you would study in a university program. So they asked me if I would start to teach a couple of classes at the university. I was probably 22, maybe 21, 22 years old. And so they gave me a class, and it was very popular. People loved it. And little by little, you know, they said, well, now we need an intermediate level class. We'll keep this beginning class. Can you know, take it to the intermediate level, eventually on to the advanced level. And then they started to become very intrigued by the fact that, yes, it was a movement form, it was a dance form, but it was also a music form. And there was this beautiful integration of music and dance, which was very unusual. It doesn't happen in a lot of dance forms that they're more familiar with. So they gave me the opportunity to continue to develop that. One of the most wonderful things that came out of my longevity at the university was the development of our festival.
The University of New Mexico has been the home to the only baccalaureate and master's courses in flamenco in the Western Hemisphere. I think there's some bachelor's degree level in Spain, but as far as masters, I believe we have the only one, and that was founded by Eva Encinas as a professor.
With our connection to the university, we have an MFA program, Masters of Fine Arts, that they can receive, which allows them to go to other universities and start programs. But what it also has done is, in the case of, for instance, Ileana Gomez came here. She was our first MFA student, actually, and she is now in Madrid performing in tablaos. Jeanne d'Arc, who was from Puerto Rico, came here to get an MFA and is now back in her community in Puerto Rico teaching at the university. Stephanie Ramirez had an interesting story where she got an undergraduate degree here, then she ended up going to Spain, marrying a flamenco artist from Spain, Antonio Granjero, and now has come back to New Mexico, and they have a tablao in Santa Fe. So it's really wonderful to see how these students are going out and making their professional careers and putting their New Mexico stamp on flamenco on a national and international level. In 1987, they were celebrating the 50th anniversary of the College of Fine Arts. And the dean asked me to put together a special performance because the students we'd started doing some performances in what we'd call the student production or the faculty production at the university. And again, very intrigued by this art form that many of them had never even heard of before, which is amazing to me because I thought everybody knew what flamenco was. They really enjoyed it and thought, well, this would be a nice way to celebrate the college anniversary. And so put together an evening of dance, and I'll give you a little budget to do it. And it was interesting because for some time now, I had started teaching back in 1976. The students were doing a fabulous job. They were learning very, very rapidly and really embracing the experience, but I knew that they were lacking access to more flamenco. Flamenco, as you know, is a very individualized art form. So every individual has a very particular way of illustrating the art form, of interpreting the art form. There are some very strict kind of boundaries and rules that one must follow, but there's a lot of room for individual interpretation. But their access to that was me. And I would give it my all, but I knew that they needed to have more opportunity to see good flamenco. I saw that as the opportunity to be able to invite some of the artists that are here in the United States to come and do a weekend of performances and some classes. It was a Friday and Saturday. There were 2 performances and workshops on Saturday during the day. It was received with such enthusiasm. It was great. So the dean asked if I would consider continuing to make it a yearly event, an annual event. And he would up my budget. And so we did. And little by little, I started to add a few more artists and bring in more musicians. And then 5 years in, I decided, okay, we have to do a special celebration. So I invited the first international artist from Spain, a guitarist, a singer, and a dancer. The artists that I chose were very honed, profound artists, and they'd never heard a singer like Talegón de Córdoba. They'd never seen a dancer like La Tati. Now, at that point, the university was ecstatic. They loved it, but they got a little nervous because they realized that the international implication of the festival was going to be difficult for a university. But they said, we will give you space. We'll give you the theaters, the classrooms. You can use university facilities, but you take on the financial part of it. So I said, great. If I have a commitment to that kind of space and that kind of in-kind support, it's going to be tremendously important for its growth. But I knew then also that I would be able to really have the ability to direct the festival in the way that I would like to. And so that's when I knew that I needed to start the Institute, because I was going to have to be able to write grants, take donations, find sponsorships to be able to support the festival.
But during the festival, again, we have 30, 40, 50 performers from Spain. And that is really what makes this festival unique.
Our first location was on Gold Avenue between 2nd and 3rd. And I thought that it was really, we were there for 15, 16 years. And it was a wonderful, wonderful old, I think it was an old bank.
Something that I knew from the beginning that Eva was so vocal about was having their own home. And they were renting that building at the time, and it was very small, so charming, and I look back at it with such fond memories. But she was so passionate about the Institute having its own home. And I remember it was about 2005, right when I started, and we went for a meeting at the city of Albuquerque where Fred Mondragon was the leading up the economic development work. And there began a very long and wonderful relationship with Fred. We were trying to figure out a way that we could establish a permanent campus for the Institute and all the incredible visions that we had for it.
Well, we helped Eva raise money for the restoration and all of that. But, Eva is, if anybody knows how to raise money and get things going, it's Eva. Yes. And so she would give us some ideas and we would follow her advice.
And one of the things that happened, I think, really shaped by the fire was thinking, how do we not just respond to this moment? And there was certainly a lot of outpouring of support from the Circle and its members and its founders, but also that started the seed for some of the larger events that we did. in the subsequent years.
And that is also the time when another one of our programs at the Institute, Hijastros, the American Flamenco Repertory Company, directed by my son Joaquin, was formed in that studio. That, alongside that university program, which was so wonderful, with the festival where they were having access to really high-end flamenco, with the conservatory, which there was a school for anyone who wanted to study. And we made sure that we had support and scholarships for lots of kids that would not be able to afford it. And that story actually goes back to Ed and Cayetana. And then Hijastros, the American Flamenco Repertory Company. It's a stepchild. And Hijastro is a stepchild. Now, its true spelling is Hijastros. But taking an artistic twist on that, Joaquin wanted to spell it Yjastros. And it was stepchild because we felt ownership, we being the Hispanic people of this community, the Spanish arts because of our heritage, but we're American. So we didn't have, there's always been sort of a little bit of a line drawn as to the authenticity of flamenco if you aren't from Spain. Now that line has really blurred now because flamenco is being done all over the world. He felt that that was a strong representation of what he was trying to do with this company. And it's become, I think they have an outrageous amount of repertories that have been set by artists that come from Spain. And it's been a fantastic opportunity for young dancers and musicians to get work, and of course for our community to see a really vibrant, exciting illustration of flamenco that is very different from very traditional flamenco, where usually is one dancer, one singer, one guitarist. This could be anywhere to 16, 18 dancers and 5 or 6 musicians. This was in 1999. We had the Institute so we could open this conservatory under the umbrella of the Institute. The conservatory is our school, our community school. The Conservatory of Flamenco Arts, and that's when we started to have classes for children and young teens and adults and ancianos, senior citizens. Both of my children are wonderful teachers as well as performers. They are all completely involved in the Institute. Marisol right now has taken over the executive direction of the festival and the Institute. Joaquin, of course, is the artistic director of Hijastros. But education has always been our energy. And so Joaquin, once his kids got into school, started to get very involved in sort of following the educational process in the school system. Of course, by that time, all music and dance had been taken out of the school curriculum, PE as well, visual art as well. Joaquin and Marisol were also raised dancing. And Joaquin was they both studied music, and they just were seeing a void that had been created in young people that didn't have access to music and dance. And I didn't, Joaquin hadn't been talking to me about this, but obviously it had been percolating for a while. And he came to me and said, Mom, I think we need to open a charter school. And they had to get me up off the floor because I was like, what? Because I know that, the public school system is very complex to negotiate.
And it was a call that came to me from Joaquin that said, Patricia, I know you've directed Mesa, I know you've been involved in organizational development and advancement. We're starting this early childhood development school to advance flamenco in a charter school. Would you be interested in helping us form the original board of Tierra Adentro, the first charter school? And by Joaquin calling, that was enough for me. I mean, pulling back at my heartstrings and his advancement and his development through Mesa, it was one of the things I couldn't say no to.
But, you know, he'd been looking into it, and charter schools had become very popular. And he said, I think we could start a partnership with a charter school that could be really wonderful. And it would give access to children that do not have the means to be able to study privately, to have access to music and dance. Because up to that point in our conservatory, there was tuition. You had to pay tuition. Now, we gave a lot of scholarship, but it still limits the number of, you know, we live in a state that has a tough economy. And a lot of people, you know, that's not a priority on their survival list. And so having a school that could be free to the public could be a really wonderful access to young people. He worked with several people in his company. I believe that there were 3 or 4 people in his company that also either were getting degrees in education or were very invested in education. And they started to write the charter. And oh my goodness, what an arduous exercise. But once it was done, they submitted it and it was accepted. It's a middle school and a high school.
When we invest in the National Institute of Flamenco, what I know that does is it removes barriers for young children who may not have access to this type of art form, may not have access to learning about this heritage, this history, our herencia. And I can't think of a better investment than investing in those young children who don't always have an invitation to the table. I think that education is always the most powerful thing you can invest in. And when you invest in our history and providing that history as a method of educating our young people, it just allows us to continue honoring the legacy of folks like Ambassador Romero and Cayetana, who were leading around the world and telling our story and increasing the quality of the connection between Spain and New Mexico.
When I first started at the Institute in 2005, there was a membership program. And it was based out of, you know, the community of parents and aficionados that supported the Institute. And so we kept that going for some time. But as the conversations with Patricia, with Brian, with Ambassador himself started to come together, there was definitely a moment of opportunity to say, how do we marry these two things? How do we create a group of supporters that can help also outreach to more folks who want to support flamenco in this community, who want to honor their friend Ed Romero, Ambassador Romero, and give on his behalf and whatnot, support the mission of education and arts and culture in the community. And so as that idea started to take root, I think the Ambassador Circle formed with a vision of building community and networks of philanthropic folks across the community who wanted to support the mission and honor Ambassador Romero, the mission of the Institute.
We started the Ambassador Circle as a vehicle to raise money. And we had the first event we had was a fundraiser that featured Cayetana. And today you have the National Hispanic Cultural Center from the foundation. The thing that we really wanted to do is to start a center, formalize the foundation.
So we started talking about this possibility of this circle from people in our community, important people. There was the ambassador, Patricia, Brian Colon, Fred Mondragon, Stuart Paisano, who was the governor of the Sandia Pueblo, which I thought was so wonderful because there was another tie into another part of our community that was so wonderful. And Luisa, Boy, Marisa Magallanes was very, very involved in the organization on so many levels. She was my right hand. You know, she really ran the business.
And so the design of it was really, I think, quite brilliant in the sense that we had folks who were connected both to the Institute and to Ambassador Romero. They came together, they brought their friends, their network, and started to introduce more and more folks to the Institute.
It's tough what we were trying to do. We were trying to develop this flamenco organization in the United States. Why? You know, why? Was the question that we would be asked a lot. It isn't something that we as Americans necessarily can relate to. But I felt more so we as New Mexicans could relate to. And then this group of people that saw that there was something very special about this organization, that they were doing something in our community that was art-centered, dance, music centered, but had an Hispanic voice. NDI, of course, had already come in and done a lot of work around the country, good work. But this was an organization that was speaking a language that we knew was important for who we are as New Mexicans. And they mentored us. These people mentored us, gave us feedback. They helped us to look at kind of the way the organization worked, brought some ideas to us and some energy that was really welcome and important for us to consider and integrate into what it was that we were doing. So the Ambassador Circle was founded, and Ambassador Romero was willing to use his name to try to access more sponsorship. He was particularly excited about the festival because there was this incredible back and forth, this pipeline between Spain and Albuquerque. So it was a way to kind of bring this together into an organization that could encourage and represent in a really important way the work that the Institute was trying to do to a greater market.
When the idea came about of creating an ambassador circle in honor of the work and the life of Edward Romero, the ambassador, and in New Mexico, when you just say the ambassador, you know we're talking about Ed Romero and his incredible partner in life, Cayetana.
I got involved because of Cayetana Romero. She personally reached out to me and said, Patricia, we need some female gumption in all of this. And would you be interested in helping us get this circle started on behalf of National Institute of Flamenco for the early preservation, development, and advancement of National Institute of Flamenco and the preservation of flamenco overall. From there forward, I've been really honored to participate and support our director and founder here, Eva Enseñas, and the National Institute of Flamenco here in Albuquerque in New Mexico, and supporting its advancement nationally, internationally, and with the continued cooperation of Spain.
We thought this would be a great way to publicize the ties between Spain and the United States. And we have never had we've never had an ambassador at this level before. Spain is, just such a key partner to the United States. We have several air bases there. They've always been our allies. And so it made sense with the fact that we had an ambassador to Spain to create something that reflected the work that Ed had done, but also the interest that he has in flamenco, and we all have in flamenco.
In the fundraising area, we depended a lot and almost totally on people here in New Mexico. So there were many people through various vehicles, including the Ambassador Circle, that donated money. And then we were fortunate enough to also get some federal money. And that's why it's called the National Center. It's already there. Of course, they continue to need money. They continue to they have various needs, and they have the support of the community.
And to this day, that's really one of the nicest successes that the National Institute of Flamenco produces. Through our kids' camp that we do every year in advance of the festival, the International Festival, we have a national kids' camp that we are able to sponsor and develop through the scholarships and the support of sponsorships of our youth. Those are through some of the very scholarships that the Ambassador Circle founders have been a part of, is being able to support those children who otherwise may not have a chance to learn the science of flamenco, the dance, the art of flamenco.
With every festival, we would do an Ambassador Circle event, and that allowed them to invite some of the important people in our community to come and witness what was happening. And you know, Albuquerque is a tough town. It has challenges. People are going to believe word of mouth, one by one, someone telling them about this incredible organization, this incredible event that is a must-see. And I really feel that my life has been spent on that one-on-one communication.
I think one of the big things is identifying a couple of angels who have been very helpful to us. Jim Long, of course, is one of them, because without him there would not be a tablao in Albuquerque. I believe it's the only tablao of any significance that mimics, that looks like the tablaos in Spain, you know, the performance sites in Spain.
Well, I was appointed in 1998, okay? And then I was there until 2001. Well, I was sworn in by Al Gore. Yes, number one, you represent the president. You're the president's representative. And you also represent the United States, of course, okay? My real boss was, in terms of a day-to-day type of thing, was the Secretary of State. And at that time, Madeleine Albright was Secretary of State. And that was the beginning of a wonderful, wonderful part of our lives. I say our lives, me and Cayetana. So we had a very wonderful few years in Spain as ambassador. If you're going to be something, and if you're going to be appointed to something, be appointed ambassador. That's a great job. And New Mexico celebrates a lot of European cultures. Your first Europeans to settle the United States were the Spaniards, and that was here in New Mexico, in San Juan. Across the river, the Spaniards settled there in 1598, and they called it San Juan de los Caballeros, okay? Anyhow, through the generations, they really, they had various dances, not only flamenco, but valses, waltzes, chotices, shawty dances, cunas, whatever, various old traditional dances. Flamenco got a lot fancier. By that I mean, in terms of the dressing, the music, and what have you. And it became flamenco was very inspiring. I mean, the dancing, the art, it's art. And I grew to like it, and I became a supporter of flamenco, being that I live in this tradition here between Spain and the United States. So I wanted to help resurrect not only old New Mexico folk dances, but also flamenco.
So it was so incredible that here this man from our own community became the ambassador in Spain. Always remember this beautiful story that Cayetana told me, that when she was a kid, she lived not too far away from where my mother's studio was. that she would drive by with her dad going, to the store or whatever. And we had these two beautiful copper doors on the front of the house. And we, most of the time in the spring and summer and fall, they were open, but they glowed. They reflected the light. So it would really draw your eye to this entryway. And if you looked closely, you could see the kids dancing inside the studio. And Cayetana said we would pass by there all the time, and I'd see those kids dancing, and I so wanted to take dance classes, but I couldn't afford it. And when I heard that story, so many years after my mother's studio had closed, and I realized that all it would have taken was for her to go and talk to my mom and her parents and say, my daughter would love to take dance classes, but we can't afford it. My mother was the kind that would say, come in, put these shoes on, and let's go. And then when I heard this story from Cayetana, it warmed my heart, but broke my heart at the same time, that she had this love for dance that was never realized. Well, of course, the ambassador became the ambassador. They ended up in Spain, where they had the opportunity to see fabulous flamenco.
And so today the Flamenco Institute under Eva's leadership is just a cultural event that's very important here in New Mexico and the country for that matter.
The Ambassador Circle will always stand for that legacy that was created by Edward and Cayetana Romero.
My name is Fred Mondragon. I am the Honorary Consul of Spain. And this is an appointment by the top levels of the government of Spain, all the way through the President of Spain. So I am very, very thrilled to be here on behalf of the Ambassador Circle, on behalf of the National Institute of Flamenco, and really all the citizens of Spain, because I do represent the Spanish government here. So I got to love flamenco as an art. And then I started exploring what was going on with Flamenco Institute and so on. And you might say the rest is history. I had a deep involvement. I'm so thrilled about that. Had it not been for Ed, I would not have been appointed. And so I was offered a seat on the board. And one of the things that I wanted to do as a board member was to broaden the constituency of the board. It was the majority of the board members were family members. And there's nothing wrong with that, because they put their money on the line and they put their lives on the line to make flamenco happen. I said, it really ought to bring in people who might be contributors, people who are well known in the community and so on. So a number of people added to the board, and they have been, by and large, extremely helpful, organized, and really created a true community board for the National Institute of Flamenco, which, in my opinion, is a very positive thing. And I think it has helped in terms of, let's just say, providing a broader constituency and credibility for the National Institute of Flamenco. We figured out that in the past several years, there has been a net influx to Spain because of the fees that are paid to the individuals, because of travel costs and things like that, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So when we point that out to Spanish organizations and the Spanish government, they're just amazed, because it's not just one way. I mean, it's not just art stealing talents. So this is very, very good. And what it has meant is that Spain has recognized us. We are recognized in the highest circles of flamenco in not just Sevilla, but also in Madrid, in Barcelona.
A tablao is a very intimate flamenco venue. In Spain, basically there were bars, right? Tabernas, where you could go to see flamenco in tiny little spaces. They get tapas or hors d'oeuvres, and have a nice glass of wine and watch flamenco. It was kind of similar to what we have jazz clubs here in the United States. And they're purposely small because that's where you can feel the energy of the art form on stage. And this literally was going to be the very first tablao that was built to be a tablao. There are some places that have flamenco performances in them, in New York and California and Chicago and here in New Mexico, where you have flamenco performances in restaurants or very intimate performances or very intimate venues. But this was going to be built to celebrate this beautiful art form.
Jim Long is, he's the president and owner of the Heritage Hotels, which includes the Hotel Albuquerque, where the tablao is located. And of course, he has a lot of hotels, including one in Santa Fe that has a venue there as well. But this is truly, he and his daughter went to Spain to understand what was required in a performance site. And I've been to tablaos in Spain, and we have everything to be very proud of. It's just a magnificent place, and people need to experience that. To be right there in front of the dancers, with them almost encircling you, and the music coming around you, and so on. It's pretty amazing.
Jim and I had never met, and enough of the people in the Ambassador's Circle had been putting a little message in his ear about the flamenco that we have here in Albuquerque. He'd been involved in having some flamenco performances in one of his hotels in Santa Fe with the great Maria Benitez, who was a very important artist in our community and did some very important work around the country. He didn't realize of the quality of programming that we did until we got him to a festival. And the reason we got him to that festival was because of the Ambassador Circle. They said, come on, Jim, you've got to come and see this. This is world-class flamenco. Well, he did. He went to a festival. I coincidentally ran into him that following week. I went to the Hotel Andaluz to have a cocktail with one of my friends. And he walked in and he came over to our table and said, "You're the director of that festival and that I just saw." And I said, "Yes, my name is Eva Encinas." And he said, "That was the finest flamenco performance I've ever seen, and world-class art that just blew me away." And he said, "I was so excited to see that we have something like that of this level, of this caliber in Albuquerque." And so he was very grateful for the seats, for the tickets that had been arranged by the Ambassador Circle. And he said, "I'd love to get together to talk with you about something that I have been wanting to do here in Albuquerque for some time." So we set an appointment for the following week. He said that he would like to start a flamenco tablao here in Albuquerque, but he wasn't sure who he should partner with. And he said, "Would you be interested in doing this? You would be in charge of all programming of the tablao. We would have an ongoing relationship, a 10-year contract to do this, and you would be involved in the designing of this tablao." So I was like, yeah. Adriana designed it. I had no idea that she was interested in design. And it's beautiful. I mean, when people see it that come from Spain, they have some beautiful tablaos there, but the expansiveness of it, the way that the stage is designed so the sight lines are so good, the sound is wonderful, the ambiente, the ambience in the space is really beautiful. And she did a fabulous job of designing it. And it has wonderful, authentic Spanish tapas. And, it's just a fabulous experience for everyone. In Spain, that's the way that artists develop their skill is they perform 4 or 5 nights, no, 6 nights, 7 nights sometimes a week, 3 times a night in these tablaos. So that's where they develop as artists. So it's been a great opportunity for the members of Hijastros and members of our community. They don't have to be members of Hijastros, members of our community that come in and participate in the tablao, and it's just fun. It's really exciting. And so we're grateful. That's another partnership that has been so important to the Institute to develop, as well as students from the university. They can come in and have their opportunity to watch for a while and then to work their way onto that stage. And that's a incredible resource for everyone. And people love the tablao. It's a great opportunity for them to come and see flamenco in truly the traditional form of flamenco, which is improvisation. Because in a tablao, that's what they do. They improvise, just as they would in a jazz club. It isn't a set choreography or a big stage production. It's an opportunity for us to see some of the artists that come from Spain in a very intimate setting. And we have on Sundays, we would traditionally have a student performance where they could come in and do a performance. All of them from the charter school, the guitarists, the singers, the dancers, and do their performance. And then we would go into our regular tablao. And that is just such an exciting way for them to start to realize, oh my gosh, this is the way we develop. This is the way we start to learn how it's done. And boy, are there some talented young kids that are coming out of that school. It's really exciting.
The longest partner of the Institute, the University of New Mexico, where Eva began her career. She just retired last December. And the role that played in connecting higher education and finding a way to sustain flamenco through a higher education vehicle also served as a feeder. Now you see the university and their guest line program and how that integrates into a professional experience with the Hijastros, thinking about the opposite side of the spectrum and the partnership with Tierra Adentro, and how in public education it's so important to introduce a cultural, artistic base to public education. And those students being able to go through an experience, starting at the Institute's conservatory at a young age, moving through their middle and high school years at Tierra Adentro, and then all the way through university and into a professional experience at Hijastros. It's such a holistic cycle of education. And then you think about the private partnerships with business. I think about the long-standing relationship with El Farol up in Santa Fe. You think about the beautiful collaboration with Heritage Hotels to construct Tablao Flamenco. These are the type of truly integrated partnerships that help build a vibrant, thriving flamenco community. And seeing the other groups that have started and are flourishing in New Mexico, it's a testament to the kind of base for flamenco that the Institute has helped build in this community.
I can't think of any other center that immediately took off with the support of Spaniards.
The government relationships are great, but also the other cultural entities. For example, we're very closely linked with the National Hispanic Cultural Center. The National Hispanic Cultural Center hosts our primary large venues, during the festival, but also during the off season.
When the Hispanic Cultural Center opened, they asked if we might be interested in partnering with them to start some programming, flamenco programming there. They knew of the festival and wondered if, they had this beautiful theater. And of course, we were excited about that and honored that they would ask us to become partners with them. And we did. So from that first year, we introduced the festival there. And so since then, we've had the partnership of the university as well as the partnership of the NHCC. And that has helped us to grow completely. And then, of course, once they saw Hijastros, they were, let's do seasonal performances of Hijastros in the theater. And it's fabulous. You know, that size theater is perfect for flamenco because it's grand, but it's still intimate enough that you can experience the power and expression of what's going on.